In every community, there are stories that get told and stories that get buried. There are bridges that lift people up and gaps that pull people apart. Some truths aren't loud, they whisper in the places between us, in the silence, in the places where equity breaks. But every bridge has a guardian, every legacy has a keeper. My name is Hakim Coggins. I am the Bridgekeeper. This is not a podcast. This is not a show. This is a movement, a journey across stories, struggle, and the gaps we must dismantle to make our community whole again. Here, we expose what's hidden. We honor the originators. We protect the truth. So welcome to the Bridgekeeper series, where courage becomes clarity, where community becomes narrative, and where truth finally crosses over. Let's walk this bridge together. This series has never been about one organization, one conflict, or one moment. It's about the systems that shape people's lives quietly, over time, and often without accountability. In Newport County, one of the most overlooked systems is mental health, not because it doesn't exist, but because too many people are struggling in silence. This episode isn't about blame, it's about care. It's about what happens when people fall through gaps that were never meant to exist, and the community members who keep showing up anyways. Before we talk about programs or policies, we have to ask something simple and urgent. Mental health doesn't always look like crisis. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like irritability. Sometimes it looks like people doing their best with very little support. In Newport County, we see it in youth carrying adult stress, in elders navigating isolation, and unhoused neighbors managing trauma without access to consistent care. And often, the people most impacted are the least resourced, not because they don't want help, but because help is fragmented, conditional, or hard to reach. Mental health services exist, but access is uneven. Appointments can take too long. Transportation becomes a barrier. Insurance dictates care instead of need. What we call a system often feels like a maze to people inside it. And when systems are difficult to navigate, people stop asking, not because they're okay, but because they're tired. I want to talk about mental health in Newport County, not from theory, not from reports, but from lived experience. Because I've been inside the system. I've watched people reach out for help and cycle right back into crisis. And the more I asked why, the more I realized something didn't line up. Public nonprofit filings show that Newport County has a fully funded behavioral health system. According to the most recently posted IRS Form 990, Newport County Community Mental Health Center reported approximately $21.1 million in annual revenue in its latest filing. That funding supports clinical services, crisis intervention, administrative leadership, and program expansion. On paper, the system is well-resourced, but outcomes are what communities feel. Because when you step outside the paperwork and into real life, you still see people in survival mode. You still see people spiraling. You still see people with mental health illness living unhoused. You still see families carrying it quietly. So this isn't a question of whether money exists. It does. The question is whether that investment is producing healing or simply maintaining systems. The experience, and what many people experience quietly, is a model where mental health becomes appointments. Appointments become prescription, and prescription becomes compliance. I've watched people get diagnosed quickly, medicated quickly, and moved along, without real stability, without dignity, without follow-through. I need to say this clearly and carefully. I'm not attacking every clinician. I'm describing a pattern a system can create because the system reimburses certain actions more reliably than others. Prescribing and short visits fit the machine. Long conversations, trust building, prevention, and culturally grounded care often do not. So sometimes it can feel like we're funding process, not healing. And this is where race matters, because it changes how you read inside the system. As a black man navigating these spaces, I've experienced in how diagnosis itself can become systemic. Bias doesn't always announce itself. It shows up in tone, in assumptions, and how quickly curiosity is replaced by medication, and who gets patient and who gets labeled non-compliant. Workers don't always intend harm, but systems shape behavior. And when systems reward speed and volume over listening, care becomes transactional instead of transformational. Across Newport County, much of the real mental health support isn't happening only in offices or institutions. It's happening in conversations, in volunteer spaces, in community kitchens, and quiet check-ins. Care is being provided by people without titles, without salaries, and often without recognition. This invisible labor is what keeps many people afloat and is rarely acknowledged as part of the mental health system. There's a part of mental health that statistics can't explain. It's the way it takes over your entire life. Mental health doesn't clock out. It follows you home. It sits at the dinner table. It wakes up with you and keeps you awake at night. I've watched people lose relationships not because they didn't care, but because they were exhausted. I've seen parents trying to love their children while fighting a mind that won't rest. Mental illness can feel like a lifetime sentence inside your own mind, waiting for a release date that never arrives, while still being expected to function as if nothing was wrong. And when the system's meant to help treats that pain like a checklist, or a diagnosis code, or a prescription refill, it doesn't just miss the mark, it deepens the isolation. Because what people need isn't just medication. They need to be seen as a whole human being. Mental health doesn't just affect individuals, it reshapes families, it alters futures, it becomes generational. This isn't just lived experience. Public health data shows that suicide rates remain elevated. Emergency mental health visits continue. Chronic mental distress persists. Despite sustained investment, people with mental illness are still living unhoused in Newport County. These aren't just statistics, they're neighbors, families, lives quietly lost in a system that too often reacts after tragedy instead of preventing. What troubles me most is the lack of innovation. Instead of evolving approaches, I see repetition. Instead of creativity, duplication. The same models recycled, the same programs rebranded, same strategies repeated even when outcomes haven't changed. Grassroots programs built from lived experience, from trust and cultural understanding, are often copied instead of resourced or partnered with. Not because they don't work, but because they don't fit institutional language. And when stabilization replaces sustained care, people are left cycling through crisis. The funding continues, the salaries are paid, but the outcomes don't reflect the investment. So, here's the question we rarely ask out loud. Are we funding jobs based on bodies and boxes checked for funding budgets? Or are we funding jobs based on results and real impact? Too often, success becomes administrative. Progress becomes paperwork. People become numbers that justify the next budget cycle. But impact doesn't live on a spreadsheet. Impact looks like fewer people cycling through crisis, fewer emergency room visits, fewer nights spent unhoused, fewer families quietly unraveling. Systems don't fail because people don't care. They fail when incentives Reward volume over value. My dissatisfaction isn't rooted in anger. It's rooted in disappointment. Because mental health care should reduce suffering, not normalize it. It should heal, not just prescribe. And it should be accountable to outcomes, not billing codes. This isn't about blaming individuals. It's about naming patterns that quietly shape lives. If we can measure prescriptions, we can measure prevention. If we can fund duplication, we can fund innovation. If we could talk about mental health after tragedy, we could talk about it before lives are lost. This is episode 3 of the Bridgekeeper series, and this bridge is built with honesty, care, and the courage to name what silence has cost us.